Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. All right, let's go ahead and let's continue with this next part 3 of chapter 2 from the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. This one, once again, continuing examples of close encounters of the second kind. Once again, this has to do with weird UFO evidence left either by the UFO itself or something else that the witness therefore saw. So this is at least a continuation of that chapter. It'll actually conclude this chapter, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it afterward. If you want to see the other parts, check out my playlist as well, just for this particular book. And then I'll include the link below if you wanted to read the book in its entirety for free. So let's go ahead and let's continue part 3 here, which once again delves into several examples of close encounters of the second kind. This one starts off with the theme or the title, Ruined Cities on the Moon and Mars, the Ultimate Artifacts. So let's go ahead and let's share that here. In recent years, the subject of ufology has, to a certain extent, become fused with the subject of extraterrestrial archaeology. Magazines that had previously dealt exclusively with UFO encounters are now devoting more and more of their pages to what might be called, potentially at least, the ultimate in close encounters of the second kind. Unequivocal evidence of alien activity on other planets in our solar systems in the form of massive, intelligently designed structures. These are perhaps the most exciting developments in the entire subject of extraterrestrial intelligence, since it is entirely possible for us to visit these places with unmanned space probes and to verify beyond any doubt that alien artifacts do indeed exist there. The most famous of these artifacts is undoubtedly the so-called face on Mars, which was first photographed by the Viking probes as they passed over the region of Cydonia in 1976. There are, however, numerous other unusual surface features in the vicinity of the mile-long face, including pyramid-shaped structures and a most intriguing object known as the tholus, a low, conical mound apparently containing a spiral ramp. When NASA first released the Viking photographs, they assured the press that the strange image of the face was nothing more than a trick of light and shadow. But this claim was later disproved with another frame containing that face was discovered. The second photograph had been taken with the sun at a different angle of elevation in the Martian sky and showed that, far from a trick of light and shadow, the face was a genuine three-dimensional object. Computer enhancement later revealed eyeballs inside the eye sockets, a mouth with discernible teeth, and regularly spaced stripes that seemed to represent a kind of headdress. According to Richard C. Hoagland, former space consultant to NBC and CBS News in the United States, the upper sections of the surrounding pyramidal structures had collapsed in places, revealing them to be hollow. This had led them to speculate that the structures might be comparable to architectural ecologies proposed by the architect Paolo Soleri in the 1960s. These colossal buildings would be completely self-contained and capable of supporting millions of inhabitants. Some critics have asked why ancient space travelers, the assumption being that the Cydonia architects originally came from beyond the solar system, would want to colonize an inhospitable planet like Mars when the comparable paradise of Earth lay right next door. Hoagland counters convincingly, saying that the architect's home planet might well have been smaller than Earth with a lower gravity. In this case, it would have been suicide to colonize a planet with a stronger gravitational field. Centrifuge experiments on animals on Earth have shown that higher gravity puts a lethal strain on the heart muscle and also has adverse effects on blood chemistry and ion balances inside cells. Perhaps the Cydonia architects had no choice but to confine their activities to Mars. Hoagland has also discovered a geometric pattern linking many of the Cydonia features. The geometry expresses two constants of nature: pi, the ratio of circumference of a circle to its radius, and e, the base of natural logarithms. Pi divided into E gives a ratio 0.865. This ratio is revealed throughout the structures of the Cydonia complex. The apparent dilapidation of many of the Cydonia structures implies that, if they are indeed artificial, they were constructed a long time ago. Attempting to date their origin, Hoagland looked for connections between the ground plan and the positions of the sun over the Cydonia plain and discovered that a line projected east from the center of the complex across the eyes of the face would have intersected the rising sun on the summer solstice 500,000 years ago. Mars is not only the only planet holding potentially shattering mysteries of this kind. At the center of the disk of Earth's moon, in the region known as Sinus Mayday or Central Bay, lies a 16-mile wide crater called Eucurt, containing a perfect equilateral triangle. In 1967, the NASA probe Lunar Orbiter III photographed two colossal objects rising out of the moonscape to the southwest of Sinus Mayday. One structure, known as the Shard, is a 1.5-mile high column with a central bulge containing a strange hexagonal feature. The other, known as the Cube, appears to be a glass-like structure, difficult to see without the aid of a computer enhancement, towering 7 miles above the moonscape and apparently containing numerous smaller subcubes suspended in a darker matrix. In 1994, the unmanned military probe Clementine photographed the entire lunar surface, sending back images that allegedly confirmed the presence of enormous artificial structures on the moon. One of the most impressive photographs is of an object known as the Castle, a geometric, glittering glass object hanging more than 9 miles above the surface of the moon. Richard Hoagland speculates that objects such as this form the remnants of vast domes designed to protect the now ruined complexes on the lunar surface. If this is true, the reader may ask, then why didn't the Apollo astronauts report their discovery? According to Hoagland, not only did the astronauts walk among the derelict lunar cities, but that was the very reason they were sent to the moon in the first place. In the climate of Cold War mistrust, it was considered essential that the Americans should explore the ancient ruins before the Soviets. When astronaut Alan Bean of Apollo 7 was interviewed by reporters from CNN and the Associated Press regarding Hoagland's claims, his reply was rather disappointing, although perhaps not entirely unexpected. I wish we had seen something like what he was describing. It would have been the most wonderful discovery in the history of humankind, and I can't imagine anyone in my wildest dreams not wanting to share that. However, Hoagland believes that Bean and other astronauts are simply maintaining their loyalty to NASA, which doesn't want the truth to be released to the public. Hoagland cites as a possible reason for this a report commissioned by NASA from the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., entitled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. The report dealt with the need to investigate the possible social consequences of an extraterrestrial discovery and to consider whether such a discovery should be kept from the public in order to avoid political change and a possible devastating effect on scientists themselves due to the discovery that many of their own most cherished theories could be at risk. Citing the dangers of contact between societies of differing technological achievements, amply demonstrated here on Earth, the report concluded that NASA would run a serious risk of undermining and perhaps ultimately destroying terrestrial cultures were it ever to inform the public of discovery of alien artifacts on the moon, Mars, or Venus. Richard Hoagland is presently seeking funding for a private unmanned mission to the moon. Perhaps then, and perhaps only then, we will only find out once and for all if the tiers of grass-like ruins have an existence outside our hopeful imaginations. And then the next segment is titled The Brief Mystery of the Roswell UFO Fragment. On March 24, 1996, a piece of metal marked with intricate lines was taken to the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell, New Mexico, by a man who claimed that it was a piece of wreckage from the now legendary Roswell incident, in which an extraterrestrial spacecraft allegedly crashed to Earth in July 1947. The man informed the staff at the museum that the piece of metal, which had been mounted in a frame with a glass front, had been picked up and smuggled away from the crash site by one of the GIs who had been involved in the cleanup operations. The GI had given it then to another man who framed it before eventually handing it to the present owner. The metallic fragment was a few inches long, twisted, and roughly triangular in shape, with a large hole in the center. Intrigued but cautious, the museum gave the fragment to the Roswell chief of police, who, accompanied by one of the staff, took it to be analyzed at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology in Socorro. The initial analysis was carried out by Chris McKee, who concluded that it was composed of copper and silver, with traces of sodium, aluminum, silicon, iron, chromium, sulfur, and chlorine. McKee was quick to point out, however, that the fragment was not cleaned prior to testing, and so these elements could have come from handling or soil. McKee also offered the opinion that the metal came from a larger piece via a catastrophic event, perhaps an explosion or a crash. The U.S. Air Force has recently claimed that the Roswell crash was actually a Project Mogul balloon, which was a part of a top-secret program to detect Soviet nuclear weapon tests. This would supposedly have accounted for the inability of Roswell Army airfield personnel to identify it. However, the analysis of the fragment in Socorro was attended by Charles Moore, a member of the Project Mogul team, who is quoted as saying that the fragment was not part of any Mogul balloon or instrument platform. Nuclear physicist and UFO researcher Stanton T. Friedman, who originally investigated the Roswell incident in the late 1970s, was also cautious about the veracity of this latest claim, drawing attention to the fact that the GI who allegedly collected the fragment has not been interviewed and may not even be alive. Friedman maintained that there is no direct link between the metal fragment and the Roswell incident itself. A very preliminary test done at a New Mexico university established that it contained mostly silver and copper and some impurities. There seem to be raised lines on the thin material as well. These tests certainly provide no reason for claiming that the specimen is of ET origin. However, they do rule out conventional iron, aluminum, nickel, alloys, etc. There is no sign to date that the material is very flexible, hard, or very strong. As it turned out, Friedman was wise not to commit himself too hastily to a genuinely anonymous origin for the fragment, responding to the claim from a Utah-based artist called Randy Fulbright that the fragment was a piece of jewelry scrap from his studio. Miller Johnson, a board member of the Roswell UFO Museum, compared samples from his studio with the fragment and concluded that he was right. The raised markings on its surface were actually ancient Japanese metalworking patterns. Fulbright said that he had given the piece of jewelry scrap to a friend, but he had never claimed that it was a piece of UFO and had nothing to do with its eventual arrival at the museum. Blake Larson, the man who gave the fragment to the museum, said he believed it had been picked up from the site of the crash in 1947. Although this affair had a mundane and rather embarrassing denouncement, it does nevertheless prove that not all of those involved in the UFO research are undiscerning, starry-eyed believers. The staff of the International UFO Museum proved themselves more than capable of getting to the bottom of the UFO fragment mystery. According to the museum's co-founder, Max Littell, the fragment will still be exhibited there, together with the full story of the research that went into establishing its true origin. Next segment is called Vivisectors from Space. In late 1967, the subject of ufology changed direction in a dramatic and sinister way with the discovery in a Colorado field of a dead horse. The wire service dispatch, which alerted readers throughout the world to this new threat, was as follows. Snippy, a 3-year-old Appaloosa horse, didn't return to the Harry King Ranch from her usual evening drink on September 7th, and her owner is blaming a flying saucer, or at least a radioactive surgeon. The horse, which was actually called Lady, was discovered in a strange and grisly state. She had been completely skinned, and her body had been unaccountably drained of blood. There were no tracks in the area, although it had rained the previous night. However, there were signs that something extremely unusual had been present. A 3-foot tall bush close to the carcass had been crushed to a height of just 10 inches, and there was a circle of 6 indentations, each 2 inches across and then 4 inches deep. There was also several exhaust marks, which were checked by a forestry official with a civil defense Geiger counter and were allegedly found to be radioactive. As with the Mantell case, the rumor machine shifted into high gear, and soon people all over the area were whispering that a Denver pathologist had found the brain and spinal column of the horse missing, together with the rest of the internal organs. This was never confirmed, however. Neither were the exhaust marks radioactive. A forestry official had checked them, but had found no evidence of radiation and had concluded that the marks had been caused by black alkali fungus. The animal itself was examined by Dr. O.R. Adams of Colorado State University, who discovered a severe infection in one of the horse's hind limbs, which could have proved fatal. Although possibly not the result of alien activity, the Sneapy case was only the beginning of an epidemic of mysterious cattle deaths that continued into the 90s and has been reported all over the world. In America, reports of unexplainably mutilated cattle and other farm animals have come in from many states, including Texas, Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, Idaho, and Minnesota. The defining attributes of the deaths were that various body parts were excised with surgical precision, with no clue left behind as to the possible identity of the perpetrators. Tongues, eyes, ears, and sex organs were almost always missing. As far as the ranchers and farmers were concerned, the mutilations were a genuine mystery. Although skeptics pointed out that the missing organs were the soft parts that scavengers always ate first when coming across a carcass, the cattle owners reacted with understandable indignation, countering that they knew perfectly well what scavenger action looked like, and it didn't look anything like this. The incisions on the carcasses were almost always perfectly straight, their edges blackened as if by a cutting instrument, one that was working at very high temperatures. Next segment, the San Luis Valley Center of Operations. There seems to be a profound connection between cattle mutilations and UFOs, which are frequently cited in the area where an unexplained animal death occurs. In recent years, nowhere has been more anonymous activity tracked than the San Luis Valley, which extends from southern Colorado into northern New Mexico. On July 4th, 1996, the Rio Grande Sun of Española, New Mexico, carried a long article listing recent UFO sightings and apparently associated cattle mutilations. Between September 1993 and April 1994, rancher Eli Hromrich lost 10 head of cattle, mutilated in a way he claimed never to have seen before. He described the deaths as unnatural, adding that he had seen hundreds of cows die from various causes, but I have never seen cows that have been cut up like the ones I lost. On November 30th, 1993, at 6:07 p.m., an ex-naval aviation navigator named Jack Cooklery saw a bright white object hurtling through the sky above his home in the Baca Grande area of the San Luis Valley. As the object approached the horizon, it flared up about 20 times its original size, turned into an oval shape, and stopped dead. It was huge. The object then changed color to blue, descended towards the horizon, and disappeared. According to Cooklery, it couldn't have been a meteor. It made a 90-degree turn, changed its color, shape, size, and velocity. Another bright object described as a white strobe light was reported by 6 residents of Monte Vista in the valley. Rio Grande County Under Sheriff Brian Norton was called out to investigate and saw the object flying just above treetop level. He estimated its speed to be 200 and 250 miles per hour. On May 10, 1994, 2 days after the above sighting, 2 cows were found mutilated in the area. The cows, which had classic incisions, were subjected to forensic testing, which revealed cooked hemoglobin, and cauterization of the incisions. On June 27, 1994, at 11 p.m., 6 residents of Moffat, San Luis Valley were out skywatching when they saw a triangular ship with no lights slowly gliding at about 1,000 feet overhead towards the east. According to witnesses, the craft was so big it blotted out the stars and was followed by smaller craft, also triangular in shape. About a month later, on July 24th, Eli Hronich found another mutilated steer on his ranch near Eagles Nest, New Mexico. As he went to examine the animal, a gray, unmarked helicopter arrived and hovered over him. The appearance of unidentified helicopters has become increasingly important in ufology and is a subject to which we shall return later. Another triangular craft was reported by Maida and Toby Martinez of Taos, New Mexico in September 1994. Together with a co-worker named Eric Tafoya, they saw a bright white object surrounded by about 12 smaller objects gliding over their backyard. Moving at a height of no more than 20 feet above the treetop level, the objects made a distinctive humming sound as they passed. According to Mrs. Martinez, it was as big actually as my living room, and there was a round light and a series of red lights, all about 12 or 15. It was the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. We could not hear the blades of a helicopter or hear the engine of a jet, and as the object got closer to our home, we heard a hum. According to Toby Martinez, the object was shaped like a stealth bomber, but he was at a loss to explain the slowness of its flight. On August 17, 1994, poor Eli Hronich found yet another mutilated cow on his ranch. The next day, 3 more carcasses were discovered 20 miles south on the Max Cordova Ranch near Truchas. According to Cordova, the cows had been pregnant, but the fetuses were gone. 2 members of his family who touched the cows suffered from chemical-like burns, and the entire family reported flu-like symptoms the next day. Strange burn-like rashes have been reported by others who have touched mutilated cattle in the area, including Eli Hronich and New Mexico State Livestock Inspector Jerry Valerio. The latter examined a dead calf on a Cuesta ranch in May and said that the meat looked like it had been microwaved or pressure cooked. Things were still looking bleak for the unfortunate Eli Hronich, who found another dead steer on August 30th, 1994. I wish I knew where they were picking on me, he said, adding that he suffered a substantial financial loss as a result of the mysterious and gruesome activity in the area. At about 10 p.m. on October 8, 1994, a large disc-shaped object was sighted by 2 witnesses in La Veta Pass. The object was shining a spotlight on the ground. Not long after, a number of helicopters were seen overflying the area, and further UFO sightings occurred on October 9th and November 6th. In the former, a glowing ball of bluish-white light was seen over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, making a slow 70-degree arc over the mountains before moving to the southeast. 5 hours later, rancher Tom Reed of Cuesta saw a bright blue floodlight lighting up the forest near the Colorado border. The November 6th sighting was made by the well-known researcher Christopher O'Brien, who has written a book, The Mysterious Valley, dealing with anomalous activity in the area. O'Brien and a friend saw a tight wedge-shaped configuration of 3 unblinking orange lights moving overhead. They watched the formation through O'Brien's night vision binoculars, which he has with him all the time, and were able to discern a triangular shape behind the lights. It was moving in absolute silence, which the witnesses found puzzling. It did not appear to be more than a couple of thousand feet up, and we should have heard something. And the last segment is called the biotech factor. One of the most puzzling aspects of these cases, and one which researchers point to as a confirmation that something unnatural is indeed going on, is the rate of decay of the carcasses. Sometimes they decompose much more slowly than normal, sometimes much faster. In addition, contrary to the skeptics' claims of natural predator action as the cause of the mutilations, many carcasses are eschewed totally by normally eager scavengers. According to Eli Hronich, the first thing you notice if you think something's dead are the birds. He describes the deaths of his cattle as a real clean deal with no blood, no flies, nothing. In one case, the buzzards sat on the barn and just looked at it. They never would touch it. Cattle mutilations are potentially the most impressive of close encounters of the second kind. The physical results of alien activity, if such be the case, are there for all to see and examine. Yet, as is frequently the case in ufology, the cattle mutilations have resulted in sharp division among researchers, with one group maintaining that mutilations constitute a fringe subject that may not be connected with UFO at all, while another group claim that UFOs are slaughtering cattle and stealing parts of their bodies for nutritional purposes, while yet another group insists that the U.S. government itself is to blame. This last claim is an example of how conspiracy theories have a habit of merging into one another, confusing the issue with a cloud of hazy and unsubstantiated rumors. According to these rumors, the U.S. government is engaged in a nefarious conspiracy to test biological weapons, a program that began in 1961 when American involvement in Vietnam was increasing. Biological weapons were banned in 1970. The program became one of the most notorious black projects, which were ultra secret and relied on untraceable funding. The goal of this program was to perfect the so-called VX toxin, a biological weapon designed exclusively to kill Asians. Testing was conducted on private land by government scientists who monitored the spread of the toxin through the bodies of exposed cattle by excising the blood, eyes, lymph glands, and other parts. Incredibly as it may seem, the rumors claim that the eyes of the cattle are chemically similar to those of Asians. Of course, such a race-specific weapon is thankfully biologically impossible, and so once again, the rumor machine turned out plausible variations on the general theme. According to one, the cattle were mutilated in order to monitor a spillage of biological weapons or radiation. Another claimed that employees of sinister corporations were conducting geobotanical prospecting, analyzing the tissues from cattle to detect mineral trace elements from the plants they had eaten and thus to locate valuable mineral deposits. However, such speculations are of little help to people like Eli Hronich, who, in common with many others who rely on ranching for their income, would just like the killings to stop. This is my living, he says, and it's cost me thousands of dollars already. Why isn't somebody doing something about it? Whatever the ultimate answer to the mystery of the cattle mutilations may be, the fact remains that farmers and ranchers all over the United States and the rest of the world are continuing to lose valuable livestock in a way that seems incompatible with the normal activities of predators and scavengers. For this reason, their status as one of the most puzzling of UFO-related events seems assured for the foreseeable future. And then that's it. That concludes everything associated with close encounters of the second kind. This from the book UFO Sightings by Alan Baker. So let's go ahead and let's briefly talk about that here. For starters, there was talk about that moon. In other words, moon and Mars, artifacts that were found on there. Interesting stuff with regards to that quote-unquote face that's still there. When it comes to the face on Mars, I've heard different things that more strongly on the side that it truly is just a natural formation. But who knows, as far as the archaeologies, as it was stated, that there was the Cydonia architects, and then that they were the ones that were there, according to the book, about 500,000 years ago as well. That's just out there. Like, that's a really, really broad theory, one that almost involves like ancient history, like that show, as far as the claims on there. So I don't know about that stuff. Someone might have to share more information on that. But what I do think is this. It is true, what they were stating about, let's say, these findings being true. It would absolutely rock anything and everything having to do with today's society. If any extraterrestrial discovery is found, you can just imagine what it'll do to people's normals, everyday lives. Like, they would be thinking to themselves, like, why am I working 40 hours when there's life out there? You know, why am I going to church or religion when there's life out there? What about death, especially when there's extraterrestrial life out there? Like, what happens? And so on. So much stuff would be just completely different. It would not be the same afterward. So there could be big implications for keeping something like that secret. As far as that Roswell UFO fragment, interesting stuff. I had heard about that a couple of years back. about that fragment and how it was associated with a piece of jewelry. And I remember seeing photos of it. I think I might have also featured it in one of my videos. I can't recall. I don't think I did, but just in case. But if anyone has more information on that, let me know. Interesting that it was left there at the UFO Museum too, which I went to years back over there in Roswell, New Mexico. Biggest surprise is it's a tiny museum, tiny. Like it's definitely not what you think when it comes to its size. But either way, though, it was an interesting place to visit. And then finally, we had the ending associated with the many encounters with livestock mutilation. You've heard them. I've heard them. There's just been either cattle or horses or something else. There's no real answer for that. I can't give an answer to it either. Are they part of UFOs? Who knows? Is it some sick person that's doing this as a prank? Who knows? But the reality is true as far as the farmers. You can just imagine the thousands of dollars that they are losing per cattle when something like this happens, not to mention the life of that poor cattle as well. Obviously, there's stuff that'll happen to it afterward, but still going out in that fashion, that can't be good for it. But either way, though, that's just one of those things, as the author rightfully notes towards the end, that these are just the most puzzling of UFO-related events, and it'll still have some kind of status that needs to be answered afterward. But otherwise, let me know what you guys think. Post those comments below, and then I'll be doing in this case, chapter 3 afterward as my next video. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.